As you know, Ebrahim was, until about a year ago, the South African ambassador to the United States for 4 years, and was really one of the most influential, successful, and respected ambassadors of any country to Washington. We ended up working very closely with Ebrahim on a range of issues from Cuba to Bahrain in terms of the work we do in countries. He also has a unique profile and distinction of being both an observant Sunni Muslim who has been highly successful in one of the most transitional, transformative democratic states in the world, South Africa. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ebrahim Rasool. Thank you for being here, and it's all yours.
If you don't mind some heresy, I want to start off what I have to say to you with this quote from Agathon. Agathon said, and I quote, "Not even God can change the past," unquote. And on the face of it, to say that there's something God cannot do to a group of believers would certainly appear heretical. But if you take God on God's own terms, then an interference in trying to reinvent history or to rewrite history and to gloss over whatever has happened in the past, I think would be forbidden for God himself. And so therefore, when we sit together, particularly vulnerable, fragile, conflict-ridden, post-conflict societies, we've got to start from the premise that not even God can change the past. The past is there. It's fixed, and it calls on us to manage it. Not for us to wish it away, and not for us to gloss it over, but for us to come to terms with it and to decide what we do with that past. And that, I think, must be the point of departure for any discussion about the relationship of the past to the present, and the present, therefore, to the future. Nelson Mandela was able to transform binaries so that they don't look like opposites any longer, but they look like important continuities. And so, for example, how can you be principled and pragmatic at the same time? Ordinarily, we would see this one as principled and that one as pragmatic, but we wouldn't see a continuity between being principled in what you believe in and being pragmatic in how you achieve what you're looking for. That's the essential Nelson Mandela. How can you be firm? Stand firmly on principle, but be flexible in the execution of your route or your route towards those values and those principles. And how can you be, and this is the great elusive binary in the USA, how can you be decisive and forward-looking on the one hand and yet be popular on the other hand? Because we've come to teach the world from Washington, in a sense, that you're either this or you're that. You forfeit popularity when you speak truth, and you plan for the long term, and you are decisive in what you believe in. And so Nelson Mandela was able to really be decisive about what he stood against, what he stood for, and yet retain popularity, which didn't come out of what he said, but largely out of his behavior and his attitude towards things. And so I think that the crucial dimension of Nelson Mandela's abilities was to reconcile seemingly irreconcilable binaries. It was 1964, facing a judge in South Africa, that Nelson Mandela, as accused number one, had to deliver a statement on behalf of the entire high command of the African National Congress. On that day, he stood there facing a death sentence, and he played the most important gamble of his life. He challenged the judge to make him a martyr. He said, "I have cherished the ideal of a free and democratic society. It is an ideal," he concluded, that I hope to live for and to achieve, but it is an ideal, if needs be, for which I am prepared to die. That statement from the dock effectively decided that the judge no longer had the courage to make Nelson Mandela a martyr, because he had effectively called them out and he had put the whole nation on standby for a way in which to respond to a death penalty. But most importantly, it was in that statement that Nelson Mandela threw down the gauntlet. He understood at that moment what was so important and what was so precious. What was the ideal and the vision that you had for yourself as an individual and as a movement that was so precious that you would be prepared to die for it? Because once you've understood that precious value that you are prepared to die for, you then knew what it was that you needed to live for. What Nelson Mandela was able to do that day was also to define courage in a completely counter-instinctive way. He did it almost in the Kantian way, where Immanuel Kant, to make a point, said that the opposite of short-sightedness is not perfect sight. The opposite of short-sightedness is long-sightedness. Perfect sight is the absolute middle between the two. And therefore, courage is not the opposite of cowardice. The opposite of cowardice is recklessness. Courage is the perfect middle, because you must have the courage to fight for what is important, and at the same time have the courage to resist the call of those who are reckless, either with their own lives, the lives of the people that they're leading, or the future of society. How do you take your vision and construct out of that a methodology, and in the words of Nelson Mandela, do so without, or quote, without the imprisonment of dogma? How do you believe, or how do you believe so strongly in your vision, in your correctness, in being right, in being on the path of justice, but have just enough doubt to admit that someone else may have a part of the truth? And how do you manage the uncertainty of the context that you're in with enough faith to know that that must inform the optimism that will take you into the future? We understood that what held us together at that moment was our inordinate love of our country. Whoever lived in Cape Town would never wish for Cape Town's beauty to be destroyed in the course of winning it. Whoever understood how much gold was beneath our feet would never want to destroy that which makes it the most tradable commodity in the world. And so we could go on about what it is that we wanted to inherit in South Africa, and at the end of the day, we needed to understand, we needed to assume that those who had been oppressing us had partly done so because they also loved this country. And could we find something appealing in that? I end by echoing a question that has been in vogue recently in South Africa. was all of this that I have explained to you a example of brilliant statesmanship or an elaborate sellout? So I think that I would be very disappointed that people who think that all of this that I've described to you was an elaborate sellout. I think certainly things could have been done harder, things may have been done better, but every leader and leadership operates in the time that they are in. Hindsight is a 20/20 vision. And many of us can do things with hindsight, but those who act in the moment, I think, act according to the best of their capacities if we believe that they were innately good people. If someone is innately bad, then you don't give him that benefit. But if someone is innately good, like a Nelson Mandela, he deserves the benefit. Thank you very much.